Today is Thursday, 9th of July, 2026. My name is Francisco Gaffney, and this is my daily streaming all about governance, risk, compliance, and advisory boards. Now, all this week we were talking about what to do when you're forming an advisory board, and particularly what is the operating system that they should be using, which is the model that we have in front of us. And particularly yesterday, we talked about predictability, we talk about revenue, assets, and whether leaders can trust the forecast. And today we are going into another portion, which is very important, which is at the bottom of the advisory board model. And let me show you, we're going to focus specifically in this section, which is the performances, governance, risk, compliance, and your assets. That is your controls and resilience. Particularly resilience is a word that actually is used everywhere. So I'm going to give you a view of how an advisory board operates in terms of resilience. This is where business need to stop using broad comfort words, right? And probably you heard some of them. Oh, we are under control. We have policies. We have dashboards. We review risk, in which is a cadence of reviewing risk, etc., etc. Usually at the budget times, if you have a scheduled budget period for every year, or every quarter, or every half year, then you review risk or you do a check on the risk. But usually I consider those kind of a buzz words or jargon meetings, because actually what the real decisions are made on those meetings sometimes is not very clear. And those things like controls, policies, dashboards, and review might be true, but they are not enough. And let me tell you or share with you the following. Business becomes resilient when it knows what matters most, what can break first, who owns the fix, and how fast the company can respond. This is related to the three main pillars of resilience. And these three main pillars are proactive planning, operation agility, and financial health. So many people talk about resilience, but what exactly they are talking about? And when you start to ask them these questions, they say, what are we talking about in terms of resilience? Proactive planning, operation agility, or financial health? And if they are not able to articulate what exactly they are talking about, you can reframe it this way. What can break first as a proactive planning? Who owns the fix? And how fast a company can respond is in terms of financial health and operational agility. Now, let's take a look at three problems with this. Problem number one is that disruption is treated as a rare thing, right? When it is now part of a normal operating life on any company. And the most classic resilience terms are coming close to the cyber incidents, or supplier disruption, or system outages, or data issues, or access problems, control risk, and staff dependencies, but are not strange events anymore. This seems actually happening every single day. So they are business conditions that we have to learn to operate. And these things sometimes are operating in people's heads, isolated one to the other. Problem number two is a weak ownership, back to the point of isolated and not related to one to the other. So meaning people understand what are the risks and the problems, and they find workarounds and help the organization, but someone knows about each risk, right? But not always the same person. As I mentioned, one person owns the system, but is isolated in their system, the software and hardware, or the conveyor belt, for example. Another owns the process, another owns the customer impact, another owns the reports. So when the pressure really hits, people spend too long working out who is responsible of what. And guess what? When they don't have this accountability, or you cannot find that accountability, then it start to dilute all the things, all the processes and systems, and then the workarounds start to get normalized, and that's where you start to get a lot of how this is the way that we do things here. Anyway, problem number three is a false comfort from paperwork, which is the other way around. The board or the leadership team sees a report and feels reassured. They say, okay, now we have a paperwork, we have our binders with our policies, we have our records, we have our checklists, etc., etc. But the evidence trail is weak. Testing is light, remediation is unclear, and important services have not been mapped properly. So a green box on a slide is not really resilience, right? So in other words, imagine a weak control environment is like the wiring behind the walls. You don't notice uh, when the lights are on, really, but you notice when the heat builds and something starts to burn and you start to smell something and smoke is coming up and say, what is going on? And these are the kind of things that people say, these are the fires they had to put down every day. I say, what's going on? What's going on? So in the model that we have in front of us, these are the causes and consequences that actually you start to see in other places. For example, if you have a very good sales team and they're booking revenue, but you don't have the assets to deliver, then this problem is impacting all the other things, right? So you have to understand that this model is providing all these mechanisms to understand which are the causes of the consequences. And many times the problems are just consequences or causes that are happening in other parts of the business model as we have in front of us. Now, as a board advisor, what I would propose to consider is the following. Number one, identify important services or products, not just important departments. Customers do not care which teams owns the problem. They care whether the service still works or the products that you're providing are the ones that they are buying. So the board should ask which services will cause real harm if they stopped, or how long could the business tolerate disruption, or what systems or people or suppliers and data supports those services, right? That is a question you have internally to start to build your resilience processes. The second thing to consider is make controls visible. Which controls are material? Material is everything that is impacting the organization. How are they tested, right? How you test those controls? Where are they the known weaknesses? uh, who owns remediation, right? Because one thing is that, yeah, I own these things, or I'm responsible for this and responsible for the other. But actually, if something goes wrong, who is the owner of that fixing or remediation? How are you going to fix that in this not happen in the future, and document the process that you went through to remediate those issues? When is the next decision point, right? So in the sequence of events, when is the next decision point, and who we need to call and why? That is called triage in certain risk environments. Now, if leaders cannot see the control picture in plain English, the challenge is weak before disruption even begins, right? So you have to make these challenges very, very strong, and not for the challenge itself. Is just to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and you have a solid foundations to build the next stage. And the third suggestion is treat resilience as a live management system. So track incidents, track lessons learned, track supplier dependencies, track scenarios tests, track whether any test changed a decision. And that point really matters, because a test that changed nothing may be a very good thing to a nice theater. Right? Oh, yeah, we did that. But a test that changed the decision is very useful, because then you start to correct things that actually have been biased in terms of the degree of where you're going mapping the organization. And it's like a ship in the ocean, right? If you have a vessel that have 1 or 2 degrees in terms of deviation from the route, you might end up in the completely wrong port, because in time that deviation starts to increase the shift in the path of that vessel in the ocean. And it can be in the plane, can be a car, whatever is the case. You can imagine if you're driving the motorway and you have a little change in your steering wheel, you may end up in a ditch. Not to be dramatic or anything like that, but actually these things really matter. So, and sometimes these deviations are so unnoticed that the whole organization is fighting something that can be corrected with a 1 or 2% adjustment. This is where an advisory board helps. Resilience is never one discipline. It's across systems, it's across people, the processes, the suppliers, the data, the cybersecurity, the controls, the judgment, right? So a permanent hire may cover one line, but it's very hard that somebody cover everything. And maybe there are people that are very capable, but how long and how much is going to cost you that permanent hire that can cover all the lines? Also, a large consulting project may bring their weight, but how much is going to cost you? And guess what? Many times, the big consulting firms, the only thing that they do is they document the things that you already know, but they not usually provide a very strong solution or uh, systems to bring solutions, unless you start to pay very hefty fees on monthly retainers or quarterly retainers. But a rotating advisory board can bring the right mix of specialist challenges around your milestones, very cheap and very easy to set it up. You can say things like a business has the paperwork, but not enough evidence. Well, you already know that. But an advisory board can bring 5 different talents to address that very quickly and very fast. And they understand the causes that are going to provide solutions to the consequences that you experience in your business. They might say the risk is known, but this ownership is scattered, right? Or the resilience is being reviewed but not lived, right? So that is a type of challenges that I mentioned that boards and founders need before pressure continues, arrives, or gets much bigger. So what do you gain working with me? 3 things: business outcomes, differentiators, and risk reductions. The outcome is a business that knows what matters most, what it can tolerate, and what needs fixing first. The differentiator is a rotating international advisory board, as I mentioned, that is built around the systems milestone of your organization. Yeah. So you get the right mix of operational risk, cyber governance controls, performance expertise faster than hiring one executive, with a lower overhead than a big consulting firm, and no talent locked in. And this is very important. We can swap members every 6 months or every year as the company evolves in their milestones and achieve certain objectives. They say, well, we're going to the next stage. And the risk reduction is false assurance. You avoid relying on one static board, one expensive work stream, or one internal owner who may not have the full picture, and capability change as the project evolves. That's what I mentioned, a rotating advisory board where the teams and the members swap as you need them. So let me show you something today that you can do in 30 minutes or less. And here we have our visual aid, and I'm going to post this in LinkedIn so you can screenshot it or take a picture and then use in your team. So ask for a one-page resilient map before the next leadership or your board meeting. So use 5 headings. Yeah, important services, impact tolerance, material controls, current weaknesses, and named owners. So if you cannot feel this page very clearly, perhaps using a challenge of let me put one word for important services, one word for impact tolerance, one word for material controls, one word for current weaknesses, and one name, not the surname, just the name, then you might have a system issue, right? Because actually, if you cannot put it in one word, then the things are not as clear as you think that they are. If you need a lot of explanation and words to explain important service, and you cannot put in one word, you might have a big challenge there. So this is a very interesting exercise in terms of your resilience. So it's all explained in that one pager that I'm sharing with you. So let's pause here for today and reconvene tomorrow, because tomorrow we move into the left side of the model, which is your age, your transformation, your reinvention, your innovation. Because once the business is stable enough to withstand shocks, which is the things that we discussed today, the next job is to staying ahead instead of only staying alive. You want to be relevant for your audiences, your market, your suppliers, your customers, not only now and this year and next year, but for the next 3-5 years. So if you're a founder, a chair, non-executive director, or part of the executive team, and you want an international advisory board built around your systems and resilience milestones, let's have a 30-minute chat. So I would love to understand where you're coming from, where you are today, and where you want to go. So we can design an advisory board around your milestones, not the recipe or a cookie cutter system and process that is coming from different sources. We can design an advisory board, real people around what you're looking for. And that brings, and the studies that support this, up to 24% of revenue increase and 18% more productivity. And how they do this? With a faster implementation than hiring one executive, lower overhead than a big consulting firm, no talent locked in, and swappable members every 6 months. So have a great day, and we'll talk tomorrow. Thank you, and bye-bye.